A lonely man felt a lump in his back. When it burst, he couldn't believe his eyes. The morning sat cold over the prairie, a pale blue light washing the land. Frost clung to the wire fences, turning each strand into a thread of glass. The dirt road ahead lay empty. No tire marks, no voices, just the sigh of wind moving across dead grass. Cale drove with one elbow on the window frame, the engine humming beneath him. He was a man no one really asked about, alone by choice or by accident. No one knew. His cabin stood at the edge of town, where the trains didn't bother slowing, and the silence was heavy enough to feel like a roof. Halfway to the feed store, he felt it, a small, sharp lump between his shoulder blades. At first, it was just pressure, the kind you ignore. But then it pulsed, a heat crawling under his skin. He eased the truck onto the gravel shoulder, stepped out, and let the wind slap his face awake. When the pain broke, it was sudden, like a blister giving way. Warmth slid down his back under his shirt. Swearing under his breath, he stripped off his jacket and flannel, tugging the undershirt free. The cloth stuck, then tore away, leaving a wide, dark blot blooming across the fabric. Something small fell from the shirt's seam onto the gravel. Cale bent and picked it up. A photograph, worn at the edges. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, hair cut straight across her forehead, a chipped tooth showing in a stubborn smile. School picture day, the kind with the painted blue backdrop. He didn't know her face. He didn't know why it was pressed inside his shirt. He turned it over. No name, just a smudge where a thumb had once rested. That's when he heard it. A sound too thin for the wind to carry. Not an animal, not the creak of the windmill behind him. A whimper, high and short, as if it wasn't sure it wanted to exist. Cale pocketed the photo and followed the sound toward the ditch. Frost cracked under his boots. The grass whispered against his jeans. He didn't call out. His voice never felt right in empty places. Near the culvert, the weeds were bent flat, and in the center of the crushed grass lay a small bundle wrapped in a sweatshirt, sleeves tied tight. Through a gap in the fabric, eyes stared up at him, wide, glassy, holding still like a cornered animal. Same haircut, same chipped tooth. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just waited, as if she already knew people didn't always come to help. Cale crouched slowly, his breath hanging between them. He set his hands where she could see them, palms open, saying nothing at all. The windmill turned once, groaning against the cold. She couldn't have weighed more than a feed sack, but the way she curled into herself made her seem even smaller. Her knees were pulled tight to her chest, the sweatshirt swallowing her frame. The knotted sleeves told him someone had put her there on purpose. Bundled, restrained, left. Cale crouched until his knees ached. The cold bit at his back through the damp shirt. She watched him without blinking, like if she broke eye contact she might disappear. "You hurt?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flicked down, then back to him. No words, no nod. He noticed the split skin along her lip, the red welt under her ear, the dirt ground into her hands. His jaw tightened. The marks were fresh. For a moment he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at himself, 30 years younger, sitting on a back porch with his shirt stuck to his back where his father's belt had kissed it. He remembered staring at the neighbor's dog through the fence, wondering if animals knew when someone was trapped. He'd kept his eyes on the dog so he wouldn't cry. The memory vanished when the wind shifted. Her hair lifted off her cheek, revealing a bruise like a dark thumbprint. He rubbed his own thumb against his palm, a habit he hadn't noticed in years. She didn't flinch when he reached for the knot at her wrist. That was worse than fear. It was resignation. Someone had taught her to stay still, no matter what came next. The fabric loosened. Her wrists were raw where the cotton had rubbed. She didn't pull away when he freed her hands, but she didn't move them either. He sat back on his heels, the photograph heavy in his pocket. Same face, same stubborn smile. Only now, it was gone. "What's your name?" Silence. A crow called somewhere far off. A truck shifted gears on the highway, too distant to matter. He could take her to the sheriff. That would be the right thing, wouldn't it? But he knew the sheriff, knew the way he looked at trouble like it was a mess to be swept out the back door. Knew he'd ask where Cale found her, and when Cale said, "the ditch," it'd be over. No one would look much deeper. Or he could drive away. Pretend he never saw her. Let her be someone else's problem. That would be easier. But the thought of her face disappearing back into the cold The same cold that had once kept him awake in an unheated bedroom tightened something in his chest. She shifted, just barely, and her hands came together in her lap. Not a plea, not trust, just waiting. He let out a slow breath. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. "Let's go." Her eyes followed him as he stood. When he held out his hand, she didn't take it, but she didn't shy from it either. He didn't press. Instead, he stepped back, giving her space, and waited until she got to her feet on her own. The walk to the truck was quiet. She climbed in without looking at him, settling into the seat like someone who'd learned not to ask where they were headed. Cale started the engine. The heater coughed, then began to breathe warm air into the cab. He put the truck in gear and pulled away from the shoulder, the windmill shrinking in the mirror until it was just another piece of the prairie, forgotten by everyone but them. The girl hadn't spoken in the 20 minutes it took to reach Cale's cabin. She sat curled against the door, one hand gripping the frayed edge of her sweatshirt like it might hold her together. He pulled up beside the shed, killed the engine, and listened to the ticking metal settle into silence. The land around them was wide and empty, a thin line of cottonwoods marking the creek. Safe for now. Inside, he set a mug of water in front of her. She drank without meeting his eyes, each sip careful, measured. He noticed the way her shoulders tensed at every creak of the cabin walls, like she was waiting for someone to come through the door. It wasn't until she pushed the mug away that she spoke, her voice so thin it barely reached him. "They'll come." Cale's gut tightened. "Who?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed on the tabletop, tracing the grain with her finger. "My uncle, and the men with him." The words carried weight, heavy enough to make the air feel colder. "How many?" he asked. "4, maybe 5. They drink, and they take things." Her lips pressed together until the skin blanched. "He said I was costing him food, said he could make more money without me." The picture in Cale's pocket felt like a stone. He remembered the girl's smile in the photo, how far it was from the voice sitting in front of him. "He sold you?" The question came out flat, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Her chin dipped once. "To someone in the next town. But I ran." Cale leaned back, running a hand over his face. He knew the next town, knew the kind of men who stayed there. A tangle of rusted trailers, illegal card games and cheap liquor. Not the sort of place a girl escaped from without leaving someone angry. "They'll look here first," she said quietly, almost as if it were a promise. Outside, a truck passed on the distant road, its tires chewing gravel. Cale's eyes flicked to the window. The sky was sliding toward late afternoon, the light sharpening into gold. He didn't like that. It meant darkness was coming, and with it, the kind of people who preferred to move in it. He thought of calling the sheriff again, but the idea died quickly. If her uncle had friends in town, and men like him usually did, it wouldn't matter. She'd be gone before morning. She shifted in her chair, curling her feet beneath her. "I shouldn't have stopped here," she said, her voice breaking just enough to make it real. Cale shook his head. "Stopping here's the only reason you're still breathing." He stood, checked the bolt on the door, then moved to the back window. From here you could see the dirt track leading from the main road. Empty now, but it wouldn't stay that way. "They'll come tonight," he said, half to himself. She didn't ask what he meant by they. Maybe she already knew. A crow landed on the fence post, its feathers black against the dying light. Cale watched it for a long moment before pulling the curtain shut. He'd spent years keeping to himself, letting trouble pass him by like storms on the horizon. But this wasn't on the horizon anymore. This was here, sitting in his kitchen, small enough to disappear in the folds of a sweatshirt, but carrying danger big enough to burn his life down. He went to the closet, reached for the rifle he hadn't touched in years, and set it on the table. Dust floated in the last beam of sun between them. The stove's heat filled the cabin, wrapping the room in the smell of boiling potatoes and wood smoke. Cale moved quietly, pulling a dented pan from the rack, setting it on the table between them. He didn't ask if she was hungry, just placed a spoon beside her hand and sat down with his own bowl. She hesitated before eating, eyes darting to his as if waiting for permission. When he gave a small nod, she dug in with small, careful bites, like she was trying to make the food last. They didn't speak, but silence wasn't empty tonight. It had shape, softened by the scrape of spoons and the low groan of the fire. After dinner, Cale stood by the back door with the rifle. He glanced at her, then at the gun, and jerked his chin toward the yard. She followed him without a word, pulling his old coat tighter around her. The yard stretched to the fence line, the moonlight spilling silver over the frost. He set up 2 rusted cans on a fence post, the metal cold against his fingers. He knelt to her height, checked the rifle's safety, and placed it gently into her hands. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. "Left hand here, right hand there," he said quietly, adjusting her grip. "You don't have to fire it. Just know how it feels." She lifted the gun, the barrel wavering until he steadied her elbow. They stood like that for a long moment, breath clouding in the cold air. Then she lowered it, eyes fixed on the cans as if imagining them gone. "My father had one," she said finally. "Only he didn't let me touch it. Said girls shouldn't know how." Cale's jaw worked. "Mine said boys should know too well." Her gaze flicked to him, reading something in the tight set of his mouth. They didn't push further. Inside he poured them both mugs of weak coffee, hers mostly milk. She cradled the cup in both hands, warming her fingers. Cale took off his jacket, and for the first time, she noticed the scars along his forearm. Thin, pale lines, some crossing over each other like a map. She traced one with her eyes, but didn't ask. He noticed where she was looking. "Wire fence," he said, though they both knew that wasn't the whole truth. She nodded, and after a pause, pulled her sleeve back just enough to show a faint ring of scars around her wrist. Rope burns, healed, but permanent. Neither of them looked away. It wasn't pity that passed between them. It was recognition. The hours thinned. He stoked the fire while she sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching circles in the dust with her finger. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, but inside, the air felt still. Cale found himself watching her in the flicker of the firelight. The lines of fear on her face had softened, just a fraction, in this moment. Before turning in, he pulled a blanket from the closet and set it on the couch. She didn't thank him, but when he started toward the bedroom, she said, "You didn't have to stop for me." He paused at the doorway. "Maybe not, but I couldn't drive past either." For a moment, neither moved. The fire popped once, sending a shadow flickering across her face. It was almost peace, fragile, thin, the kind that exists only when you pretend tomorrow isn't coming. But it was enough for tonight. The knock didn't come. It was the crunch of tires on gravel that pulled Cale from half-sleep. He was in the chair by the window, boots still on, rifle across his lap. The fire had burned to coals, casting the room in a red that felt too much like warning. Through the thin curtain, headlights cut across the yard, sweeping over the fence posts and landing on the cabin wall. The engine idled low, a growl under the cold night. She was awake before he moved, sitting up on the couch, eyes wide in the dark. "They're here," she whispered. Cale stood, checked the rifle and glanced toward the back door. But running wouldn't help, not out here. A truck door slammed, then another. Boots hit the ground. Voices carried, thick with drink and winter air. "Cale!" a man called, his tone almost friendly. "We just want what's ours." The girl flinched at the voice. Cale stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, breath turning to steam. 3 men stood near the truck, shapes in worn jackets. One had a shotgun resting on his shoulder. Another held a length of chain. The one in front, thick-necked, eyes that never smiled, took a step forward. "She don't belong to you. Hand her over, and we'll be gone." "She's not going anywhere," Cale said. His voice was low but steady. The man chuckled. "You think you're a hero, old man? She's a runner. Belongs to family. Family doesn't leave a kid tied in a ditch." The chuckle died. Last chance. Behind him, the girl had come to the doorway, small in his coat. The man's eyes slid past Cale to her. "You didn't tell him, did you?" he called out. "Didn't tell him you took from me." Her breath caught. Cale didn't look back at her, kept his eyes on the men, but he heard the guilt in her silence. "She took cash," the man went on. "Took more than she's worth." The words hit like a stone, but Cale didn't move. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it didn't matter. "You're not taking her," he said. The man's jaw tightened. The one with the chain stepped forward. The shotgun shifted, aimed low, but ready. For a moment, the cold air seemed to still. Cale lifted the rifle, sighted center mass on the leader. "Turn around," he said. "You won't fire," the man replied. The chain clinked as the second man closed in. Cale shifted his aim, fired once into the dirt at the man's feet. The blast split the night, echoing across the prairie. The men froze, their shadows trembling in the headlights. "You want to find out if I missed twice?" Cale said. The leader stared at him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "Not worth it tonight." They backed toward the truck, boots grinding gravel. The shotgun stayed aimed low, but the weight of it lingered. When the engine roared to life, Cale didn't lower the rifle until the tail lights had disappeared into the dark. Only then did he turn. She stood in the doorway, eyes bright with something between fear and shame. "You could have let them take me," she said quietly. "Could have," Cale agreed, setting the rifle on the table. "Didn't." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the last sound of the truck away into the empty night. The night didn't return to quiet. It only shifted to a different kind of noise. The girl's breathing was uneven, and the wind rattled the loose tin on the shed. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called, sharp and lonely. Cale locked the door, slid the bolt home, and let the rifle rest in the corner. His hands ached from gripping it too long. She hadn't moved from the doorway. The coat swallowed her shape, her hair hanging loose and damp from the cold air outside. "They'll come back," she said. It wasn't fear in her voice now, just certainty. Cale didn't answer. He stepped past her, grabbed the canvas duffel from under the bed, and began tossing things inside. 2 blankets, a half-box of shells, the photograph. When he set the photo on the table, her eyes caught on it. She reached out and took it with both hands, tracing the bent corner. "School picture," she said softly. "Last year." He waited, but she didn't offer more. By the time he had the truck loaded, the moon was high. Frost glistened on the hood, and the air was sharp enough to bite skin. He didn't tell her where they were going. She didn't ask. The road unrolled in front of them, long and empty, headlights carving tunnels through the dark. They drove until the sky began to pale at the edges. At a bend in the road, Cale slowed, pulling onto a narrow track that wound into the cottonwoods. The ground was hard under the tires, the creek whispering somewhere beyond. He cut the engine. "This is where we stop," he said quietly. She stepped out, her boots crunching on the frost. The air smelled of water and old leaves. Cale pulled a tarp from the bed, covering the truck. Out here, you couldn't see it from the road. They sat on a fallen log near the creek, neither speaking. The current was slow, slipping over stones like it didn't have anywhere to be. After a long while, she said, "You didn't have to come with me." Cale kept his eyes on the water. "Didn't feel right letting you go alone." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, as if that answer would do. The sun broke low through the trees, throwing pale gold across the frost. In the new light, the bruises on her face looked softer, but the set of her jaw was still there, same as in the photograph. Cale reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo again, handing it back to her. "Yours," he said. She held it like something fragile. "I don't have anything else from before." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat until the sun was high enough to warm their backs. Then Cale stood, offered her a hand, not to pull her up, but just to let her know it was there. She took it this time. They walked back to the truck, the frost melting under their boots. Neither looked back toward the road they'd come from. When the engine started, the sound was swallowed by the trees. The creek kept whispering, the sun kept climbing, and the cabin they'd left behind stood empty, quiet, but not at peace. Winter gave way to a reluctant spring, and the two of them stayed in motion, town to town, never long enough for names to stick, always gone before questions started. Cale found day work where he could, mending fence lines, hauling feed, fixing what others didn't have the patience to fix. She stayed close, quiet, but watching, as if cataloguing the way a life could run without chains. The bruises on her face faded before the snow melt did, but some marks didn't fade. He saw it in the way she froze when a stranger's voice rose too quickly, or how her eyes tracked every door in a room. They didn't talk about the night at the cabin. Not once. But some nights, when the fire was low and the road dust still clung to their boots, she'd rest the photograph on her knees, smoothing the bent corner, as though it could straighten the past itself. Cale didn't ask her what she wanted from the future. He wasn't sure he had one to offer. But slowly, without deciding, they began to build something that felt like a path. Shared meals, a set of unspoken rules, the kind of silence that didn't press against your ribs. One morning, outside a grain elevator town no one would remember, Cale woke to find her gone from the cot in the corner. Panic burned quick and mean through his chest until he spotted her outside, sitting cross-legged in the dirt with the rifle across her lap. She was watching the sun climb over the horizon, steady hands resting on the stock. "You'll scare people." A rugged middle-aged cowboy standing in a dusty, sunlit Old West desert town, wearing a worn-out brown cowboy hat and a faded olive-green shirt, with one side pulled down to reveal his shoulder. He turns his head to look back with a concerned expression. On his exposed shoulder blade is a large, fresh, red bruise, clearly visible and surrounded by a red circle highlight. In the background are old wooden buildings, a dirt path, scattered dry bushes, and rocky desert hills under a bright blue sky. The scene has a cinematic Western film look, with high detail, realistic lighting, and sharp focus.